Welcome. Really appreciate y'all coming out tonight to hear what is non-duality, or at least what I think non-duality is. And before we kind of get into the talk about what this is, I want to invite you that this isn't like a lecture like you would think like academically. This when we hear a talk like this, it's meant to it can be a spiritual experience or at least an introspective experience. So I invite you to receive the content in that way, not like what is he saying, like a sermon. It's not like that at all, like you would think of like a church or something, but more of like the ideas. The ideas are meant to be provocative to how you see the world. They're meant to sort of stimulate your creativity, your curiosity for how you look at the world yourself and what this idea rubs against or rubs with that viewpoint. And in so doing, you'll have your own experience, your own awareness and thoughts. And that can be a unfolding process for you if you treat it like that. Now, obviously, you're welcome to take notes and things of that nature if that helps you. But I've been going to this sort of thing for many years, and that's how I always approached it. That it's actually the listening process has a meditative quality. It's not about trying to just gather information, but to have treat it almost as a meditative experience where you allow your own response, whether it's emotion or thoughts, to interact with your awareness based on whatever the subject matter of the presentation is. So this subject matter is non-duality. And to me, the idea of what is non-dual or the non-dual, to me, it is the spiritual experience. It's the spiritual experience that cultures have talked about and labeled and described differently, but also very universally many times. And this is just the word that resonates with me, non-duality. And so before we can really even describe non-duality, we first have to talk about duality and understand what is duality. And I would like to invite you to think of duality as actually having two meanings tonight. Duality has two meanings. It's very nice, right? Because it's dual. Easy to remember. The first duality, I'm going to call the duality of opposites. Okay, left and right, hot and cold, light and dark. Duality of opposites. That's the one that's most common. That's how people usually understand duality. We're going to go into that more in depth soon. But the second definition of duality is the duality, with another person popping in here, is the duality of opposites. No, that was the first one. Duality of observation. Duality of observation. Two O words. Make it easy for you. Let me just greet Anna, just so you know, we're recording, but welcome. So glad you're here. And we just got started.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah. So basically, I was just kind of introducing non-duality as a concept. And before we can define non-duality, we want to first define duality. And the first one on the spectrum is the duality of opposites, hot, cold, light, dark, more common. But the second axis is the duality of observation. I observe something. I'm a one. What I'm observing is the two. So you can think of it like a T shape, right? So here's my sense of I, and I reach out to an observation, an object. So we call this a subject and an object. And through the duality of observation, the subject interacts, whatever, with that object in some way. But then I want you to think of it as a T, because usually what happens to that object is that we then define it in some sort of opposition. We split it very often. We're going to talk about that soon. Okay, so duality of opposites, duality of observation. And the reason non-duality is helpful is because it says, hey, both of those aren't really what's going on. They're held in this bigger container. But sort of the practice, the spiritual quality with the spiritual thing that's going on here is that many of us get lost in the opposites. Our awareness, our consciousness is swimming around in this idea of division and separation. And this leads to this sense of, any sort of sense of lack, separation, loneliness, whatever it may be. And so then there's this calling, this yearning for the spiritual, for the reconnection, for the healing, for the oneness. And what's beautiful about non-dual work is hey, it's actually not really far away. Because if it was far away, you'd have to travel a distance from point A to point B, and that would be dual. I'm here now, and I got to go there, right? I'm not spiritual now. I'm not experiencing connection, oneness, blah, 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 blah. I'm broken, shattered, whatever it may feel. I'm sick, and I've got to cross a threshold to point B, where I'll feel healthy, enlightened, free, what have you. Right now, I feel bound. When I'm enlightened, I'll feel free. And so that in itself is dual. I have to go from point A to point B. I've split my sense of self into two pieces: the bound, suffering piece, and the free, unbounded piece. I've taken one thing and I've split it in the duality of opposites. And I say, hey, as long as you're doing this, you'll always be doing it. By the nature of it. You can't get rid of one half in preference of the other half. You can't get rid of the bound part of your nature and just have the unbound part of your nature. All you have is just the entirety of your nature. So let's try to understand what's happening when we make this division. We say, hey, there's actually two parts of myself. There's this part that wants to be healed or freed, whatever the kind of paradigm, and I've got to work towards it, right? Here I am, and I got to go here. We split. What does that dividing piece? What cuts it in half and makes a threshold? Let's use an example. I'm going to use a really simple example. Depending on how spicy we get later on, we might get some more charged topics. But for now, we're going to keep it really clear. Hot and cold. I've got a friend. We go play games at their home, and he has a different calibration for temperature than normal people. Okay, when you go into, it's winter, and he's walking around flip-flops and shorts. Okay, so I go into his house. I go, whew, it's cold in here. And he goes, really? He comes into my home and he starts taking off clothes. I was like, whoa. I go, really? You're warm? So let's say, 70 degrees, or let's say 72 degrees. That feels comfortable to me. That might be hot for him. So what I call cold, he calls comfortable. What I call hot, or what I call cold, he is comfortable with. So our definitions of the words are different. This is where we start to get very interesting, because we live in this world of separation. We've got you, me, and all these other people here. We've all got our unique relationship to what is hot and what is cold. This is the duality of opposites. What are we talking about, right? What we have is the temperature, right? It is only one temperature currently. But my friend, he's hot and I'm cold. And so I got to bring sweatshirts over to his house and he's got to wear shorts. Thankfully, that's enough of a compromise where we can both then have our company together. But what if it was more extreme? What if his definition of hot and cold was even further apart than mine? Let's say I needed it to be 75 degrees to be comfortable, and he needed it to be 65 degrees. Because his definition of hot and cold is the line where he divides temperature is further along the spectrum than mine. This happens all the time. His poor partner. We go over their house and then we're all bundled up and he's in shorts. He knows this, so then he's usually the one who's just like wearing like just shorts and a t-shirt no matter what. And so in this situation, it's kind of comical, it's nice. But what if it was even more extreme? I wanted it to be 85 degrees in order to feel comfortable. And he wanted it to be 40 degrees. This is our definitions of hot and cold now, okay? And we both had the autonomy to choose, right? Let's say we both live in the same house and I want it to be warmer and he wants it to be colder because he wants to be comfortable and I want to be comfortable. And we're taking the same temperature and now we don't have a comical little funny thing between friends. Now we have conflict. This is the power of duality. And so hopefully you're getting that we're not really talking about hot and cold here. We're talking about the way cultures see the world. Now, thankfully, I have my home and I can keep whatever temperature I want it. And he has his home and he can keep it whatever temperature he wanted. But if let's say I wanted more territory, I wanted his home too. And my version of hot and cold, it was different. We draw the line at different places. It's the same temperature. We're both talking about temperature. But what is hot for me? No. What is cold for me is hot for him. We can't agree. We just can't do it. His sense body, his upbringing, his genetics, whatever it is, has led to this dichotomy that where we just cannot find common ground anymore. Now, even I met most of us normal folk, we all have a difference, 68, 70, 72, a little more humid, a little more wind. We all have our unique preference to that. So each one of us, none of us is exactly identical in how we say ideal temperature. We have a unique relationship to it. And sometimes you find people who have more extremes. They draw that line. What is hot and what is cold? They move that line on the spectrum of what we call temperature. I got another one for you. Chocolate. Everyone's got a preference about chocolate. And I'm very blessed. My mother, I live far away, so she loves to send me in the mail chocolate. It's a very sweet thing for her to do, just to say, hey, I'm thinking about you, my son. But she would always send milk chocolate. Sometimes she'd send both, some dark chocolate and some milk. I don't like milk chocolate. I'd rather not eat it. It was still a very sweet gesture. Sweet gesture, you get it? But the only people who were benefiting were my friends. I was giving this milk chocolate to my friends because I like dark chocolate. And I would say, Mom, it's so great that you're sending me these gifts. I really appreciate it, but can you just send dark chocolate? She's like, but don't you like milk chocolate? I was like, not really. No. And then she still sent milk chocolate. I was like, what's? And then I realized she likes milk chocolate. Because she likes milk chocolate, therefore, and I'm her son, I like milk chocolate. And then she starts saying, Emily likes milk chocolate, doesn't she? Emily doesn't like milk chocolate either. But just the sense of connection. She was doing this gesture to feel connection. And because that's her preference, she's saying, hey, you must prefer the same thing as well, because this is about us connecting. Milk chocolate makes me feel joyful, so therefore milk chocolate makes you feel joyful. Then you got those crazy people who think white chocolate even is chocolate. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I mean, maybe there's some like weird cacao lipids in there, but there's definitely no cocoa in white chocolate. It's just sugar and cream. Why do we even call that chocolate? But for some people, they say white chocolate's the best chocolate. This is crazy to me. I don't even think it should be considered chocolate. And maybe now you're starting to realize that we're not just talking about chocolate anymore. You're not even worth being on the spectrum of debate. It's all just personal opinion, right? That's what we're talking about. And if it was something a little more serious than chocolate, maybe something like identity, based on your religious values, cultural values, we've got a big problem now. We don't have something funny and joyful about just mom sending her son some chocolate. We have conflict. So duality is quite powerful. And in its extremes, it can be quite dangerous in that power. Here's where it becomes dangerous. It's always powerful, in my opinion. It's powerful, it's beautiful. Variety is wonderful. But it's dangerous when we identify with the preference. I prefer dark chocolate to milk chocolate. But I have no problem with milk chocolate existing. I have no problem with people preferring milk chocolate. It doesn't bother me the slightest. But I bet you all, and I don't want to call you out, but I bet you can certainly think of someone in your life. And let's say it wasn't dark chocolate, milk chocolate. Let's say it was something political. Let's say it was a religious value, where they would go, I can't even allow milk chocolate to exist. There should only be dark chocolate. And I'll argue with my father. He'll go, oh, dark chocolate's terrible. He loves milk chocolate. He would be fine with dark chocolate not existing, even though his son loves it. It's a joke. But there's certain subjects for certain people, it's not a joke. It should only be a certain type of chocolate out there. Why? Why do we care so much? Because in dualism, we split the opposites and you got to pick a side. Because you don't know what you are in that scenario. This is the problem with duality. In duality of opposites, we lose sense of our true nature, our actual nature, and we identify with something in the spectrum. I prefer hot weather. I prefer cold weather. Let's warm the planet up. So you're starting to see the metaphor going on here, I think. And the reason I'm taking this moment to pause here about it is this has been a way for me to find peace with the struggle and conflict in the world. Non-duality. Non-duality has been the thing, because I start being able to go, oh my gosh, I can find solace knowing that, hey, that it's actually the same mental functioning. It's the same processes. Because I got, you'll see like, younger, youthful, they actually identify with their type of chocolate, right? You identify with your favorite sports team, where you're from, your upbringing, culture, right? This and that. Your type of humor, your type of television, your favorite character on Game of Thrones. And why? Because they make you feel like you. That's the trick. They make you feel like you. Are they making you feel like you, or just making you feel at home for a little while. They're helping you explore something for a little while. I don't think they're making you feel like you. They're helping you explore a nuance of nature for a little while. So if you love milk chocolate and you always go down the milk chocolate pathway, is it because milk chocolate is a part of your identity? Or it helps you explore a part of consciousness? You get a feeling when you consume milk chocolate. It helps your preference. Same thing with a character on a television show. It's like you root for a certain type of character. Is it because they make you feel like you, or is it because they're allowing your awareness to explore something interesting to you for a little while? This is part of the difference. This is part of the separation from duality. Otherwise, we want to keep picking left, right, good, bad, light, dark, milk, dark chocolate, hot, cold. And in the spiritual understanding of non-duality, say, hey, if you're doing this process, it's never going to end. It's never going to end. It's an endless journey. All you're doing is reaching out into the world, splitting it, and then picking a side. And then you're reaching out again, splitting it, and picking a side. And you're literally going through your navigation of outwardness, looking at objects, splitting into two sides, picking your side, and going further. And you kind of make this like wormhole, this tunnel through your mindscape. And you call that your identity. There's a mystery in mystery teaching. You've heard of the snake. Snakes are in indigenous cultures, mythologies, lore, religious lore through time immemorial, the snake. And the snake does not move in a straight line. The snake goes left and right and left and right, left and right. And its tongue is bifurcated. When a snake probes the world, it probes the world in duality with two prongs, left and right. And then it kind of decides left, 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 right, 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 left, right, left, right. And so you'll see in certain symbologies in different religions, you'll see this snake actually moves up the spine. It goes left, right, left, kind of swirls around the spine. And then there's some mystery around even the Garden of Eden. The snake gave the apple to Eve. So in the symbology there is what's going on. Maybe one way of interpreting it is that I'm giving you the power to look into duality. I'm evolving in human consciousness the ability to see opposites now. And depending on how you interpret that Bible story, it's either a very bad thing and you're going to be screwed trying to get back, or it's a very powerful thing, an opportunity. Nevertheless, there was a division that happened in that moment. And the snake represents our now very much ability of the ego to say, I prefer left versus right. It becomes dangerous when we identify with left over right. There should be no lefties out there, only right-handers. That was a thing for a little while in our culture. Quite sad, actually. So duality, you could think of it as the worldly journey. Some would say that even spiritual concepts are still lost in dualism. We quarrel over this a little bit. You in your own path, you may have realized certain things are just better for you. Certain healing practices, certain lifestyle choices. Right? We're calling them choices here. I'm going to not eat this food and I'm going to eat this food instead. And we define it as a duality. This food is unhealthy for me. This food is healthy. This type of meditation practice, this type of exercise is healthy. Not exercising is unhealthy. And again, we're creating our sense of identity. We're saying we're living a more spiritual or a more healthier lifestyle, but it's still, as far as non-duality is concerned, lost in this dichotomy. You still have to then resist the thing that you don't prefer. We call it aversions. Attractions and aversions. I say this is an endless web. It's not a bad thing. It's actually great. It's great that we can try so many different things and that people can be so different. But when we identify it, we make it separate. And sometimes our culture will create that such separation where it becomes conflict. And we feel conflict sometimes in our own soul, in our own hearts. We just don't need to be. And they would say in non-duality, the reason we feel that conflict in our own soul and our own hearts is because we've actually lost, we've forgotten the non-dual. And then we just believe we're in our preferences. Understanding a little bit the duality of opposites, seeing how it can be quite a slippery slope in our own personal lives and as a culture, as a world community. Let's do one. I got a lot of. It's easy to take politics, and I don't want to slip down that slope, and I might just lose some people on a hard line. But let's try it. Let's use something. Let's use climate change, because we're talking about temperature here, right? We've already gone over temperature. Well, you've got some people who say this is not because of this. And you've got other people who say this is because of this. We take the same idea, our current climate, and we split it in half, and we quarrel over what is happening. Is the climate changing because of humans' fossil fuel emissions, or is it not? Is it just climate change because that's what happens? Who knows? There's all different reasons why we create a split, a divide. But that split and divide is influenced by our personal preference, by our development, by our culture. This is where it becomes really hard. This is where people often lose the practice, because we've invested emotion into this, into it being a certain way. And so it becomes impossible to see I can't believe how someone would choose not climate change. Climate change is happening, and we need to do something about it. So I can't see how someone would choose not climate change. What non-duality says, hey, you're welcome to keep your preference. It may actually be very valid and true. But to understand that the reason someone would choose not when the bifurcation happens at the snake's tongue, that the person would go down towards not climate change, that they live in a different reality than you. They've made a series of left and right turns to make this be the only option. We think it's a choice, but my friend, he cannot be comfortable in what I consider warm. He's going to be so hot. You see, it's his sensory body. It's not his fault. It's not his choice. It's how he was raised. It's his genetics. It's his upbringing. It's the dice he was dealt. And the same goes for me. What I consider hot and cold is just different from what he considers hot and cold. And we can see it at that level. I know you all can see it because I saw you nodding and things. And it makes sense. But then we pick something that's a little more teeth to it, something you probably care about. And all of a sudden, I can't understand how someone would choose not climate change. Non-duality says, well, you can. Because you can back up, you got to back up your own thing first and say, hey, I'm just looking at the environment. And you can start to actually, if you get down to the root before it splits, you can go, oh, I can see how that person lives a life that leads to that decision. You don't have to agree. Definitely don't agree. But for me, it gave me understanding. I can still not like those people. So here's a good test. If you thought after I just got done saying what I was saying, that I don't think that the planet's warming up, you really didn't hear what I was saying. I didn't tell you whether I believed in climate change or not. That's not what happened there. All I was talking about was the process of how we divide and see other people as not like us anymore. I'll give you a personal one for me. Zoos. I love animals, but I'll never go to a zoo. To me, there is a fundamental value that's being broken in that moment for myself. There's a captivity. Putting a living creature that has a brain in captivity is not okay. I'm not trying to tell you shouldn't go to zoos. I could care less whether you go to zoos. I have people who friends, they go to zoos, they get a lot of benefit. I'm just not going to go. This is not a speech of me trying to get you to not go to zoos. I'm not a member of PETA. I don't make a stand on this one. I don't tell anybody. I wouldn't tell you about this because I'm not telling you about my preference right now. I'm telling you about how the dichotomy happens of duality of opposites, that it's okay for me to have preference and still comprehend the non-dual. I don't believe in zoos. I don't believe in captivity as a thing. I don't think things should be in cages. But I can get along with anyone who likes going to zoos. I don't need to, because I have an understanding that there's a benefit there for them. Now, if it was a real thing, maybe I become a political activist. I make it a stand for myself, and I do call people out on that. It doesn't get there for me. It's enough for me to act in the world as a person who just doesn't want to go to zoos or support them. When on Reddit, I like part of an otter Reddit, like looking at the otters. I always downvote the ones with the otters in captivity. That's enough. It's not a big political act. I'm not picketing or protesting. It's just how I feel. And I can get along and live in the world and have my heart be at ease because my value is anchored, but I'm not in conflict. You see the difference? This is the non-dual. We call this actionless action. Now, if I had to fight to bring down all zoos, couldn't do it. It would tear me apart. The ego, my ego is not strong enough for that endeavor. And so I rest my ego back in my heart, this is where I make my stand. I just don't support it. And that's enough. Now I find peace. I think a lot of times people politically, they don't realize how powerless they are. I think they kind of do, and they don't want to admit it. And so then they think that they can make a difference. And so they start arguing with their loved ones. Even if you convince your loved one to be on your side of the duality, you haven't changed anything. And usually you don't convince your loved one. Usually you stop speaking to them for a little while. This is the duality and the dangerous power of duality. We don't have to identify with our values. You can if you want to. You'll see where it leads you. I have my values, but I don't have to identify. Duality of opposites. Okay, I think we've got the point now. Again, just to make sure, if you took away from that, Richard doesn't think anyone should go to zoos, you weren't listening. That was the takeaway message. You weren't getting my point. It was merely just an example from my personal life about how you can still have values and still have your preferences and be in the world and be at peace, even on things that really matter to you when other people would disagree. So we've talked about duality of opposites. Let's talk about the duality of subject and object. This is how we start to get some freedom from the duality of opposites. We have to go back and say, oh, I'm not the temperature. I'm not at stake if the people on the other side of the spectrum don't get on my side of the spectrum. I am not at stake. What I am, who I am, what we are is not at stake if the opposite does not get on my side. That's this line. That's the spiritual. That's the step into the spiritual. That's the freedom now. If you don't do that, then you get lost in the opposite again. I can only be free if I can get them onto my side or get rid of them completely. More extreme version of it. They either have to be on my side or get rid of them completely. And only then will I be at peace. This is a worldly endeavor. We see many religious movements now because we live in a culture that is defined not by the spiritual, but by the worldly. We actually witness religious people in duality because that's how they get to express it. That's the arena. But in fact, the religious experience is saying, hey, what they'll do is they'll say, God is in charge. So the different cultures have different ways of making that journey back from the object to the subject. From the object, right? Here's the duality of opposites. Here's the object that gets split. The object gets split. From the object, we have to go back to the subject. So some say God's in charge of all of it. In the duality says actionless action. Go back. Return to my true self is another phrase we hear spoken. Sometimes you use higher self. The oneness. Go back to the subject. But what they're really saying, at least from the perspective of non-duality, is the subject. Return to the subject. Return to the one who is observing the process. Can you observe the duality? Yes, then you're free. You can go back into the origin of the watcher who's seeing the split happen. Your body, your words may take a preference, may take a route. But you, what your nature is, has the power to be at the origin before it turns into the object, before it has the relationship to the object. There's just you. Then we go, oh, I like being young. I have an aversion to getting old. I like being rich. I have an aversion to being poor. I identify with being poor. I don't like the rich. Back and forth, back and forth. I'm working class. I don't like people who don't have to work. Identify with the object. Identify with the identity, the action. Always duality. Return to the subject. Just a me. Just a me here right now. This is the freedom. Then you live your life, and you actually, this has been my experience. You don't see so many anymore. You don't see so many dualities. You just go about living. So if you don't like the idea of surrendering to God or letting God be in charge, you would say something like, my higher self. You pick your words, it's fine. All religions that I've come across, they have this built in. Because when we get back to the subject, we can't put words around it. Because as soon as we use words, my definition of hot is different than my friend's definition of hot. And we're using the same word, but we mean different things. We say climate change, I mean one thing, you mean another. But you look at the quality of these. The first line of the Tao Te Ching says, the Tao, that is the spoken Tao, is not the real Tao. They're saying, hey, the word is never going to get the real meaning. We're admitting this right from the start. The word is never going to get the real meaning because the subject cannot be defined, right? We have the subject. Once we get out to the object, infinite description, infinite detail, infinite divisions of opposites. But as we go back down to the subject, no definition in the true subject. In the Jewish tradition, they say unpronounceable. God's name is unpronounceable. So they work the same idea into it. They have letters for it, but you can't say it. It can't be pronounced. Very similar to saying can't be defined. In the Sikh tradition, it says unnameable. Unnameable. And then Hinduism is unable to be divided. What is unable to be divided? The subject. We can't do it. In our brains, in our minds, as an individual, we can infinite divide things up. Define, define again. Define, zoom in, define again. Right? Split it apart, define it more. Split it apart, define it more. And we're all doing that, coming up with our own unique definitions. For the most part, we're getting along or getting by. Every once in a while, one group of us will get in conflict with another group of us because our definitions of what is good is different from your definition of what is good. And now we've got a big problem. But if we go back, we undo the opposite, we return from the object to the subject, we're all in a state of undefinable, unnameable, just existence as it is. It's not hot or cold, it's just the temperature outside. It's just the temperature that it is. There's a Zen koan. So what is the sound of one hand clapping? You're meant to like meditate on this and then give an answer to your teacher. The best answer, the answer. The sound of one hand clapping is the sound of one hand clapping. There's no definition. It's just what it is. The thing is what it is. This is the non-dual, the undefinable, the unnameable, the unpronounceable. And to return into that is an actual experience you can have. You can let the mind just stop dividing, stop reaching out into that process. This would be healing. This would be enlightenment. But they say, hey, it's already like that. We're just not perceiving it that way. You're looking at duality, but it's not really duality. It's always just the temperature outside. It's not hot or cold. It's always just temperature. It's always just what is. And so this would be a process that you would try to then examine. So you think about it, you philosophize, but then you actually try to do it. Maybe start light, start with your chocolate, start with temperature. And then you maybe would even start to work into things that you had a little more teeth in, maybe some political issues for yourself, where you just can't stand certain people because they believe things that are different from you. You get worked up inside, tears your heart apart, literally tears it in two, breaks the soul in half, because you have to hate other people. Who are you? Return to the subject. It doesn't happen. It doesn't mean you might not disagree, might not have your preferences still, but there will be understanding because there's a knowing when we return just to the subject. That's the non-dual. Because the subject and object falls apart and there's just what is. You just look around your space right now, look around with your room, or if you're outside, look around outside. And what you see, undefinable. You just see reality. It's free in the mind. This was a knowable state. So I think that's good. I'll make Just one little quick thing here. So this normally is a study group. We read this book chapter a week and we discuss. And the Maharaj, he has these questioners come and they talk to him, they ask him questions, and he just does what he just picks apart their dualities. That's what he does every week. Nuances every time. Each person's coming with a different duality, a different reason that they feel separate, and he goes and he leaves them in the state of the non-dual. That's what the book's about. And so we read it and then we discuss together. So I thought I'd give you a little presentation about what non-duality is if you find it interesting. And we're going to shift into a discussion now, and I'll stop the recording, but just so you know, like for the question and discussion for the last 10 minutes here, we usually, just like in study group, we always have agreements, because when we get into this stuff, it could get personal. It's as we start to like look at ourselves, we try to find solace and peace for things that are meaningful, that are charged for us. Sometimes there's some vulnerability there. And so we always do some agreements. So I'm going to go over those agreements with us now in case anyone has any shares for discussion. I encourage you to use I statements. I think the world is like, I feel, as opposed to the world is, or you know how. Because when we say things like the world is, or you know how, we're already saying, hey, don't you already agree with my side of the duality of opposites? But when you say I think or I feel, you're at least acknowledging that there might be a different way of seeing things. It's really good as a personal practice to help you see that process unfolding in your mind, and it just creates a safe container for your listener. No one gets called out ever for not doing it, but it is a good practice. So we just go over that. Next one is, I hope you even got that tonight. In the study group, we're not here to convince or even give advice, but really just share and discuss. This is how I see the world. I don't care if you take on my view. I just wanted you to hear me and think about it. I would actually love to hear. I'd love to be not challenged necessarily, but like to hear the rub. That's part of the work. We want to create a safe container to share and discuss, as opposed to one of us trying to convince the other, because that's duality of opposites. That's conflict again. Even advice is like, hey, how do I get you over here? And the last one is, you also don't have to share. So you're welcome to just come and sit and listen. So we meet just like this every Thursday at 6:30. So I'm going to pause the recording now. And if anyone has any discussion or question about the presentation, this would be a good time for that. Hope you enjoyed listening.